Well, good afternoon and welcome along to Unbelievable with me, Justin Briley. It's the show that gets Christians and non-Christians talking every Saturday afternoon here on Premier Christian Radio. We're also online. Many people download this every week at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. A really exciting show today on the universe and where it came from. But before we get to that, just a quick reminder, if you're listening and you don't know about it already, Unbelievable, the conference 2012 is happening in just 4 weeks' time, Saturday the 26th of May. I'm going to be joined in London around the Clapham Junction area by 6 top speakers, including Hugh Ross of Reasons to Believe and Ken Samples of the same organisation, John Lennox, Krish Kandiah, Michael Green, Bonnie Yule-Kuhn, as we look at the evidence for the Christian faith and how to use it in evangelism. That's Saturday the 26th of May in London, and I do hope you can join me for that. If you haven't booked in already, do so now. Just a month left before that conference kicks off. premier.org.uk/reasons is the place to do that. premier.org.uk/reasons. Unbelievable, the conference 2012 in association with Reasons to Believe. But let's now dive straight into today's programme.
You're unbelievable.
Well, today we are asking, can we get a universe from nothing? And my special guest by phone from the States is Lawrence Krauss, a physicist at Arizona State University. Cosmologist is another way of putting it. Author of the book A Universe from Nothing. As an atheist, he says that advances in modern cosmology and physics have given us an answer to the age-old philosophical question, why is there something rather than nothing? And we don't need God as a cause for the origins of the universe. Well, in conversation with Lawrence today, Rodney Holder, course director at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in Cambridge. He's got a doctorate in astrophysics. He's also ordained in the Church of England, which gives you a clue as to where he comes from on the faith perspective. He's the author of books such as The Heavens Declare, which seek to reinstate the enterprise of natural theology. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, both, for being with me today.
Pleasure. It's great to be here.
Great.
Virtually, at least.
Virtually, absolutely. Well, thank you, Rodney, for coming in from Cambridge. Thank you, Lawrence, for being available on the line in the States. Starting with you, Lawrence, it's been a really interesting reaction to this book, A Universe from Nothing, because there are many people who have given it a great amount of acclaim. I mean, you've got on the back Sam Harris, Mario Livio, Martin Rees, A.C. Grayling, and indeed Ian McEwan. Richard Dawkins gives the afterword. So obviously a lot of critical reception, but also some, interestingly, a lot of criticism as well from certain quarters, and we'll get to that in the course of the programme. But where did this book come from? Can you tell us a little bit about the background?
Well, I've been talking about the revolutions in cosmology for some time, and basically it was prompted by the fact that I happened to give a lecture on the subject at the request of my friend Richard Dawkins, at an event in the U.S., and there was a flood of interest in it. There was over 1 million people who watched it on YouTube, and I thought, well, that suggests that maybe it would be of interest to people to read about. And then I also, in response to that video, I'd gotten a lot of questions and discussions, and I thought I could take the opportunity to expand on those discussions and be a little more careful and really work through the subject. And it was fun to write the book, so I did.
One of the key things, obviously, that you claim to be answering in the book is why there is something rather than nothing. And
by the way, let me just jump in and say what I claim is that we have we can see a plausible route for doing that. I don't claim that we have all the answers, and sometimes people claim that I've argued definitively that this must be the case, and of course that would be presumptuous of me. So anyway,
and it's fair to say that it's not everything that the book is obviously involved in. It's a very readable and, for me, a fascinating guide through the history of cosmology and the Big Bang Theory and that sort of thing. And from that point of view, I think you obviously have a way of elucidating things for the those who don't have a brain the size of a planet, as it were. But it's so thoroughly interesting the whole way through. Obviously, it's those chapters towards the end of the book which have raised the most questions for a lot of people about whether we can take away some kind of a conclusion about whether there is any kind of divine or simply physical cause for the universe. We'll get to all that in a moment. We must introduce our other guest as well for the conversation today, Rodney Holder, who joins me from Cambridge, where he's course director at the Faraday Institute there. Rodney, how long have you been involved in physics and science?
Well, I read maths at Cambridge in my youth and did research in astrophysics at Oxford from 1974 to 1980. So that's some time ago, but I have maintained an interest in that field. I worked as a consultant at the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence for a number of years after that, for about 14 years, and then went back to Oxford to train for ordination in the Church of England, picking up a degree in theology during that time. But I've maintained an interest in the interaction between science and religion all my days. And for example, the anthropic principle was just coming into play as I was leaving astrophysics. And that's been a fascinating source of insight, I think, for me and for many people.
And did your scientific research at any point conflict with your Christian beliefs?
It never has. A lot of people say there's a conflict between science and religion, but for me it never has. In words attributed to Johannes Kepler, I'm not sure that he ever said them, but they would be in tune with his thought. When we do science, we are thinking God's thoughts after him, and it's always struck me that that's what we're doing. We are uncovering the laws of nature with which God has endowed the universe. When we see the vastness of the cosmos, that just adds to my awe. The title of my latest book, as you rightly say, is The Heavens Declare, which comes from Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. And the psalmist, of course, had an extremely limited view of what the universe was. But my view of the awesome nature of God has only been expanded by studying science.
Well, I know.
Well, I have to jump in for a second. Maybe it's too early to jump in.
No, feel free. Go ahead and jump in.
And the point is that I think many of us feel in awe of the universe, which is one of the reasons why I study it. And some people call the awe God, and that's sort of semantics, and I can buy that. But when one talks about the fact that there's no conflict between science and religion, well, in a vague theistic sense, that's fine. But if you're going to talk to me about the doctrines of the church, whether it be a virgin birth or whether it be that the earth stood still, the sun stood still in the sky, it's a miracle. I mean, it's all right if one picks and chooses and throws out the things one doesn't like from the scriptures. But then it seems to me what you're really doing is just saying it's nonsense, and I agree.
If I
please do.
would reply to that, I certainly think that science uncovers, as I was saying, the laws of nature, which is God's normal way of acting. Through the laws with which he's endowed the universe, the seasons and so on, as the Bible says, the rain it comes on the just and the unjust and so on. But I think God is not constrained by the laws with which he has made. That would be entirely in tune with the thought of the great fathers of the church, such as St. Augustine, who said that God had endowed the universe with potentialities, seed-like principles, he called them, at the very beginning. He created everything together for the universe to unfold according to these potentialities. But God is not constrained by that. And when God acts...
believe the sun stood still in the sky?
Well, that I think you do have to do a certain bit of picking and choosing. So I would see that as a more metaphorical way of thinking, but not the virgin birth, and fundamentally not the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For me, the most central miracle on which everything hangs is the resurrection of Jesus, for which I think there is extremely good evidence.
We probably I think it's fascinating. We've already gone to the conflict aspect, but let's come back to that and maybe to start with probably where a lot of the interest and criticism around the book has been, Lawrence,
Sure.
which is this idea of whether you actually answered that question on the front cover of the book. Why is there something rather than nothing? Now let me just quote a chapter, for instance, or a segment of a chapter where you've been taking us through the idea that nothing is unstable, and you conclude the chapter saying the lesson is clear. Quantum gravity not only appears to allow universes to be created from nothing, meaning in this case, I emphasize, the absence of space and time, it may require them. Nothing, in this case, no space, no time, no anything, is unstable. So just take us through what you mean by that. In what sense do you mean nothing is unstable?
Well, what I've discovered is that nothing is a very slippery concept, and I've tried to be fairly careful in the book, and some people, you're right, have taken umbrage at that because they don't like the description of nothing as being. Ultimately, they would argue that nothing is that from which only God can create something. But to me, nothing is first. I mean, there's a variety of forms of it. Nothing could just be empty space. Certainly, if you think of the nothing of the Bible, it's sort of an eternal empty void in which there's nothing. But in this case, I'm talking about no space, no time, no universe, which is a pretty good definition of nothing. Namely, the very space that we inhabit did not exist. Now, there are key semantic and to some extent philosophical questions about whether that's absolutely nothing, because, for example, if there are laws that can create something from that, then where did the laws come from? And we could talk about that. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the real, if you wish, miracle that people seem to think requires the existence of God for, is that you can create a universe full of stuff, full of stars, planets, humans, remarkable things, out of nothing, literally where there were no stars, planets, particles, space, etc. And that particular quote-unquote miracle is something that the laws of physics certainly get plausible explanations for how to get there. Now, as I say, there's this philosophical question of whether that is sufficient nothing to obviate the need for God. But to me, that's the really remarkable thing, that we can understand how this universe in which we live in could arise spontaneously. Now, in fact, I go one step further in the book and talk about how even the laws of physics themselves may arise spontaneously as the universe arises, in which case there are no laws, and the laws arise at the same time as the universe arises, which might go one step further towards the nothing of the philosophers, if you wish. That to me is a more semantic question. The key fascinating thing to try and understand is how we got this amazing universe, and how you don't need a creator, you don't need someone to obviate the laws of physics to produce it.
Look, what do you think of that, Rodney?
Well, I think it's extremely interesting, and I think the way Lawrence describes the development of the universe from its initial very early state is very interesting and helpful. But it does seem to me that he's ontologized this nothing, if you like. Nothing, in the philosopher's sense, is the absence of anything. And yet the nothing that Lawrence talks about, at one point it's a quantum vacuum, which is certainly something, acted on by quantum fields and gravity and so on. And at some points in his book, I think Lawrence acknowledges that. He then seems to take this further step further to what he thinks is absolute nothing, where there is not even any space. Yet even this, whether he's talking about a singularity of infinite density or what, I'm not quite sure. But whatever it is, it seems to have properties. It has the property of being unstable. It has the property of being capable of being acted on by quantum fields and gravity and so on.
I actually think you're misunderstanding that.
Right,
it didn't exist. There's a meta. In that case, there's a metaverse, if you want to call it that. But literally, it's like the question. Let me put it in the frame of something that seems less controversial, that I think you'll agree with, which is, let's just say an electron in an atom jumps from one level to another. And what does it do when it does that? It emits light, right?
Yeah.
Where was the light before it emitted it? Where was the light? No, where was the light? It wasn't anywhere. It was created.
Indeed.
Now, you might say it had the potential to exist,
yeah,
but it certainly didn't exist in the electron. It wasn't there.
No, that's quite true, and I think you have a nice analogy about the potential of me being in my parents, that sort of thing,
Yes.
before I exist. But there is never, even if there is the potential, that itself is not nothing. It's the atom and so on, all pre-exist the photon and all that sort of thing. So there is always something physical pre-existing.
Okay, if our universe didn't have the potential to exist, then how did God create it?
Yeah. Now, what I do grant you is that it is difficult to understand quite how God himself creates out of nothing. But what the Christian doctrine of creation says is that God is something that pre-exists, even if that term has any meaning for God being outside time. But God is eternal, is necessary being, and so on. And most philosophers, and indeed cosmologists, I think, until recently, have thought that the universe itself is contingent. It may or may not have existed. It could be different from what it is. And I would just like to mention, it's great to have this endorsement from Martin Rees, but in one of his books he said this question, why there is something rather than nothing, is something that science cannot understand, but which is the province of philosophy and theology. Stephen Hawking, in his earlier book, talked about what breathes fire into the equations, so there can be the most wonderful theory, but why is such a theory instantiated? And the same goes for Dennis Sharma, who was actually my supervisor, but at a much humbler level, but he also supervised Rees and Hawking for their doctorates, and said, the ultimate question is why there is something rather than nothing. That is something we can never understand.
I mean, it's interesting.
Well, again... Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, obviously you've been taken to task a little bit by, there was this review in the New York Times by philosopher David.
I was a philosopher, not a physicist, so I discounted.
Okay, so well, this is interesting because you obviously discount philosophy quite a bit in the book, and you feel that it's kind of dragging its heels. In fact, you seem to be very much in tune with where Hawking was coming from in his book, The Grand Design, where he felt that physics has overtaken where philosophy has sort of stopped. But then just today I was sent a link to Scientific American. I don't know if you managed to see this yet yourself, Lawrence. Science will never explain why there's something rather than nothing, says John Horgan.
Written by someone who wrote a book 25 years ago saying the end of science, that physics is over. So I think, again, such a claim of what can and cannot be by someone who makes such a claim about physics, I think is again discounted. And sort of upsets me because I actually saw the review, and what amazes me is people write reviews about reviews, so they don't actually read the book, as far as I can tell. They read a review of the book, which, by the way, in that particular review didn't even describe anything I talked about in my book. I mean, it was my book's a book about cosmology. The review didn't even mention the word cosmology, and then all these people write reviews based on what they think I said instead of what I say. In fact, in the book, if you actually look for references to God or religion, there may be 4 pages.
Yeah.
It's really not a tirade against God and religion.
Yeah, indeed. Could I just butt into that because I want to agree with what Justin said at the beginning. I really enjoyed the book from that point. It's a tremendous exposition of what's going on in modern cosmology. That I think is absolutely true. And as you rightly say, the bits about God and so on are small in comparison with all of that. I suppose I just think it's a bit unfortunate that they're there.
Let me jump in what you said, because I really think you hit the nail on the head in a very clear way. That this question of something from nothing has always been said to be, well, science can't address it. It's the domain of theology and philosophy. And the point is that I don't think you can just say that by fiat. What is amazing is that there are aspects of that question which are now being addressed in science. And in no way do I ever claim that that we have, that the answer to those questions is definitively known.
Yeah.
But what is remarkable is that because of the progress of the last 20 years, there are many aspects of that question which were previously thought to be the domain of theology and philosophy, which now at least can be addressed by science, and in fact need to be addressed because we've been so successful. We're beginning to be forced to ask questions that we'd rather not ask, such as, are the laws of physics unique, or are there many universes? And those, and in fact, is there a multiverse, which in many ways I would say meets the exactly the same role as God. It's eternal. It's outside of our universe, and the only difference is it's well motivated. Whereas I would argue God isn't well motivated. But
Let's talk the multiverse. I mean, well, just before we get to that, I mean, just finishing up. I mean, it's interesting that you've dismissed obviously this review by David Albert because he's a philosopher. I mean, the point.
He also didn't understand the physics.
Okay, so when he says this in, I'll just pick out one part. He says that the fact that some arrangements of fields, he's talking about quantum fields here, happen to correspond to the existence of particles and some don't, is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that some of the possible arrangements of my fingers happen to correspond to the existence of a fist and some don't. The fact that particles can pop in and out of existence over time as those fields rearrange themselves isn't a whit more mysterious than the fact my fists can pop into and out of existence over time. None of these poppings, if you look at them aright, amount to anything even remotely in the neighbourhood of a creation from nothing. So he really thinks you've equivocated on nothing. You've claimed nothing is that you've answered the question, which you simply haven't. This isn't the question that people have been asking.
I think you validated exactly my point. My point was that science has suggested that the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is not a particularly interesting question anymore, because it's no more interesting than the question, I put it in my book, I said it may not be more interesting than the question, why are some flowers blue and some flowers red? You know, for philosophers, nothing and something were just dramatically different, and you needed something to they were just profoundly different, and physics is arguing that they're not that different. So in some sense, he was completely agreeing with me. Now, the point is, he certainly didn't understand the physics. He says that the laws of physics don't determine why there are certain particles or why there are certain forces or why there's even space, and that's because he doesn't understand quantum field theory in a curved universe. In fact, dynamics tells you sometimes certain fields exist, sometimes certain particles exist, depending upon the nature of the way the laws of physics relax. You'll have certain massive particles, certain forces exist, certain other forces not existing, or in fact you might create spaces or not create spaces. And so to argue there's a real difference between having empty space with no real particles, which is a quantum vacuum, and one version of a quantum vacuum, no real particles, and having space full of galaxies and radio hosts and theologians and physicists.
Yeah. I suppose it boils down to the question, though, why is there even a quantum vacuum? You know, that's the question. I mean, in a sense, if you've answered any question, it's why is there something rather than a quantum vacuum? Is that fair, or do you think he's misunderstood?
No, I don't think. It's a first step affair. If I'm talking about a quantum vacuum in existing space, but I'm ultimately saying, why is there even space? Now, it could be that in this, you might then say I've pushed the question further to why does the multiverse exist, and are there any laws within the multiverse? And yes, you can keep asking that question, why, ad nauseum, and it's turtles all the way down. The point is, if our universe was created spontaneously in a larger object, for which there may or may not be laws that we know, then you can always ask, well, why does that eternal object exist? But you could ask the same question about God, and ultimately that kind of question.
Well, that's the question, I suppose. If you're saying that, okay, you'll never get to the bottom of this, and you'll always have another. Well, why is that there? And then if you explain that, well, why is that there? And you say, well, God isn't any help in that situation, because then you've just got to ask the same question of God. I suppose, well, what is the answer to that, Rodney?
Well, I think that is to misunderstand, if you'll pardon the expression, it is to misunderstand what we mean by God as necessary being. Often the question is asked, well, okay, turtles all the way down. Who created God then? And that's to misunderstand the nature of God. Anything that's created is not God, by definition. God is eternal, necessary. Now, we can argue whether God exists
why
or not.
I never understand that. I hear that from apologists all the time.
Yeah.
Why does everything have to be necessary? I don't feel I'm necessary.
No.
I don't understand what necessary has to do with it. The universe could just be an accident, and that's life.
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't have to be necessary that it existed.
Sure.
It just happens to exist.
I think we can perhaps come to a point of agreement on this one. Basically, the choice you are faced with is this universe, or any universe, multiverse, whatever, the result of creation by an eternal necessary being? And I think that's an extremely satisfying explanation, and explains a lot more than simply why the universe is here, a lot more. Or is the universe just a brute fact. And frankly, that that takes us back to Leibniz, and who raised this issue: why is there something rather than nothing in the first place? I mean, he had this principle of sufficient reason. Everything has a reason for its existence, and you can track that back in the universe. Now, does the universe have a reason and for its existence? And Leibniz would say yes, but you can abandon the principle of sufficient reason and say no, it just is a brute fact, and that's the choice you have to make.
But that raises a big... I mean, are you prepared to do that? Are you prepared to just say this is a brute fact, Lawrence, and that's it?
Well, all I care about is brute facts, in some sense. I mean, I don't make presumptions. The problem with religion is it assumes the answer before it asks the question. It says, yes, there must be a purpose, and yes, there must be a God, and yes, it must have happened this way, and let me try and explain it away. And the point is, we have this evidence of nature, and what science tries to do is trying to figure out how it works, and not add a lot of presumptions because of our preference that we're necessary or that there's meaning and purpose.
But when you come,
try not to impose our biases on it, and I must say,
don't biases run in both directions, though, Lawrence? I mean, it occurs to me that, for instance, when the Big Bang Theory was introduced, people like Fred Hoyle didn't want it to be true because of what it might imply in terms of a creation event.
And the great thing is that whether we want it to be true or not, it happened.
But I'm just saying there's bias in both directions, surely, if you're an atheist, if you're a Christian.
But the difference is we let the facts determine the results. I don't like a multiverse. I happen to think it's an ugly thing. But if the laws of nature tell me that that's what happened,
I said we'd come to the multiverse.
I don't care what I like. The universe certainly doesn't care what I like, and it certainly doesn't care about us or what we want. And I don't also care about what Mr. Leibniz said. That's the other thing that frustrates me in these arguments, is that we refer to philosophers who wrote at a time when we didn't know that there were 100 billion galaxies. I mean, who cares what they say? We act as if they're authorities about something. They knew nothing.
Well, I think one thing I would share, if I may come back in, is a certain dislike or skepticism about the multiverse. But on the other hand, if we can get some evidence for the multiverse, I mean, a lot of your book, it talks about evidence, then we might
let's
have
talk
to
about the multiverse in a moment, because we must take a quick break now, and we'll come back in a moment. We'll talk about the multiverse. Well, good. I'm glad you are.
Great to chat to you.
It's good, and we like a bit of robust discussion, so that's quite all right here on the programme. Unbelievable, with me, Justin Brierley, and we're talking this afternoon with Lawrence Krauss, author of A Universe from Nothing, in conversation today with my other guest here in the studio, Rodney Holder, course director at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in Cambridge. Come back again in just a moment's time. Welcome back to the programme with me, Justin Brierley. Back to our conversation here on Unbelievable in a moment's time between Lawrence Krauss, atheist physicist, and Rodney Holder, Christian physicist, on the origins of the universe and whether we can get a universe from nothing. Before we go back into that, let me remind you that in 4 weeks' time we'll be hosting Unbelievable, the Conference 2012. And that is a day full of teaching, seminars, Q&A. You'll be able to interact with some top minds, really great Christian thinkers. John Lennox is going to be joining us again, such a favourite at last year's conference. We'll be hearing from new voices. Krish Kandaya is going to be there. He's a young guy who's just doing amazing work in the field of evangelism and mission, and someone who's been on the scene a long time, Michael Green, who has been a leader in apologetic mission for decades, really. Bonnie Yulkun of the Alpha course is going to be present, and we're going to be looking at putting evidence and evangelism together. We're doing it in partnership with Reasons to Believe from the United States, and it'll be Hugh Ross and Ken Samples who join us for that. So I do hope you can come along for what promises to be a really fantastic day conference. Let your church know. Do tell them about it, and check out, if you go to the Premier website for the conference, premier.org.uk/reasons, you can book in there. You can see the little video trailer that we've released recently. That's had a lot of views already, so check that out as well. And come along to what promises to be a fabulous day conference, full of teaching, full of information, full of inspiration as well, to take away to where you are and to start to meaningfully interact with sceptical people about the claims of Christianity. Do hope you can join me for it. Saturday, the 26th of May, Unbelievable, the Conference 2012, in the Clapham Junction area. Really easy to get to, great transport links for Clapham Junction, and it's going to be at Transformation House. Once again, if you want to book in, premier.org.uk/reasons. reasons. For now, let's get back into today's conversation.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
If you want to get in touch with me, then you can always email unbelievable@premier.org.uk. @unbelievablejb is the Twitter handle if you want to correspond with me on Twitter. I'm glad to do that. You can also follow on Facebook, and that's facebook.com/unbelievablejb for the Facebook page. So we're continuing to talk today on the programme about Lawrence Krauss's new book, A Universe from Nothing. Why there is something rather than nothing. We've talked at some level about what some of the criticism of the book that some people have put forward over to whether that question has really been answered in it. But we're going to talk about the multiverse theory as well. Rodney Holder also joins me here in the studio, course director of the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in Cambridge. Lawrence Krauss is himself a cosmologist, is that the right term? Lawrence?
That's not to be confused with cosmetologist.
No. Arizona State University is where Lawrence hails from, and we've been talking about this book. In a sense, you have beliefs about the universe. Obviously, you believe they're based on the evidence, but for instance, you don't believe the universe has an ultimate purpose, do you, Lawrence?
I see no evidence for it. I don't like to use the word belief. I mean, as I often say, if tomorrow the stars were to line up and say, I am here, I'd begin to be suspicious.
Well, it's interesting, though, because isn't it the fact that we live in this multiverse, which that could happen as a natural result of a multiverse that we live in, because anything can happen in an infinite number of universes, couldn't it?
Well, anything. It's true in an infinite number of universes, and anything. Well, even in a single universe that's infinitely long-lived, anything that isn't ruled out by the laws of physics will one day happen. That's a true statement, but you can also show the probabilities are extremely small. And
it's only that
we work with probabilities. Physicists never, and I'm sure the Reverend will agree with me on this. Physicists never talk about anything with 100% certainty. They say that's extremely high probability of this or extremely low probability of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and yet we have to, and so therefore, in a sense, we're always talking about belief. We're never quite talking about knowledge in the absolute sense. We're always talking, I think, about belief.
Interesting. I would say the opposite. I would say we're never talking about belief. We're just talking about knowledge.
Well, that is interesting, you see, because knowledge has a kind of absoluteness, like the 100%, rather than the probabilistic thing.
So for me, the only knowledge we have is from experiment. I guess that's another thing I should point out. Maybe it's a character flaw.
Well, I'd even disagree.
The only knowledge we have about the world is empirical, it seems to me.
Do you know, I'd disagree about that, because I think pure mathematics is just about the only knowledge we have, rather than even experiment. We can be deluded, deceived by things in the natural world.
Well, mathematics could describe many universes that are quite different than the universe in which we live.
Well, that of course is quite true. Yeah.
Turning to the multiverse hypothesis, I mean, a lot of people have said, Lawrence, that scientists, physicists, because they want to explain away the obvious aspect of fine-tuning of the universe, the fact we live in a universe which appears to have these constants, physical constants, which seem to be set to infinitesimally accurate levels for life to be able to emerge within the universe. They say it can't be luck, it can't be chance. The odds are just stacked against that. It's design. Well, obviously, not necessarily, you say. If there's a multiverse, if there's an infinite number of universes with all sorts of different ranges of constants that could exist, then we happen to live in the one that produced life.
Well, look, that's disingenuous. I mean, I know it's what people say, but I think it totally misrepresents why physicists have been driven to this. First of all, the universe, we have no idea if the universe is fine-tuned for life. The one constant that is so inexplicable to understand is the energy of empty space, and much of the subject of my book is about it. It is unbelievably fine-tuned in the sense that it's unbelievably small compared to what we would expect. And if it were as big as what we'd expect, there'd be no life. But, it could have been much smaller. It could have been zero, and life would exist fine. The other thing that's inexplicable is why it's not zero. So we don't know whether things are, there could have been universes that are even better tuned for life than the ones we live in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have been driven to the multiverse not because we need some explanation of weird things, but because, in fact, there's lots of physical arguments to suggest that as that there can be more than one universe. In the case of something called inflation, which is our best theory of the early universe, there naturally will be produced many different causally disconnected regions, which you would call a universe. We now mean by universe not everything, but only that which we could ever have once contacted or ever once would be able to contact. So anything outside of that region we call another universe. And so there's lots of good physical reasons now to think that there are many possible universes, and similarly, in each of those universes, you could land in what we call a different vacuum state, a different configuration of particles and fields. So we haven't been driven to it purely for philosophical reasons. There are good physical arguments for it.
It's still very much a hypothesis, though, isn't it? I mean, we've got we can't observe these universes in any way.
No, and I think that's really important to state. But let me point out, I did try and talk about it in the book a little bit, of an argument that would turn it from metaphysics to physics, at least in the sense, because I'm an empiricist, and I think if you can't test it, if you can't falsify it, it's not science. And so, but here's a way to do it. Look, we believed, we understood that atoms existed well before we could see them, right? Because there were lots of other predictions that only made sense if atoms exist. So let's say that we really did have a good physical theory that explained why there were 3 generations of elementary particles and why there were 4 forces in nature and all of the rest. Yet it predicted, as part of that theory, it predicts a period of inflation in the early universe in which you will naturally create many different universes. Then you would say, well, if it explained the 20 or 30 different aspects of the universe we didn't understand and makes other predictions, all of which agree with observations, then the one prediction we can't see is probably true. So I think that that's a way we could sort of validate our expectation of things we couldn't directly detect.
Rodney, what's your...
Yes, I think I would agree that it starts to look more like science if there is a universe-generating mechanism which, in some sense, comes naturally out of existing theories. I think I would agree with that. Part of the problem, though, is that the theories in question are... well, certainly in the case of string theory, and I think Lawrence sort of acknowledges this, are highly speculative. This is the one that gives rise to the landscape and different universes characterized by different values of this vacuum energy. So I think there is a lot of speculation involved in all of this. And what we really need are unique predictions that come from particular theories which can be validated in the lab, such as the Large Hadron Collider and so on.
It's interesting because I had Roger
I agree completely with everything you just said.
Great.
I had Roger Penrose on this programme a couple of years ago, around the time of the release of Hawking's book. He said very much the same thing. He thinks that the multiverse theory, for him, he said, it is too often used as a way of getting out of things, and there's far too much sort of speculation when it comes to string theory and that sort of thing as to how this would arise. But the issue then for you though, Rodney, is, well, is God any better an explanation, as it were, for our fine-tuned universe, or should we always look for a physical, cause, and even if that's somewhat hypothetical, as the multiverse is, it's still better than a completely different entity altogether, which is God? Well,
that's a good question, because I am in favour of pursuing science as far as science will go, absolutely. And I think the multiverse has some purchase on this fine-tuning. It does better than a single brute fact universe in doing that. And... there were some theists who were in favour of the steady state, believe it or not. There are some theists who are in favour of the multiverse, and I could name quite a number of them. What matters is whether the multiverse in question has sub-members within it, individual universes, which are conducive to life. And it seems to me that always the question will be pushed up a level. From, well, why is this universe so special that it gives rise to life, to, well, why is this multiverse so special that it gives rise to life? And then when you try and progress beyond that, you virtually have to go for this cosmologist Max Tegmark's maximal multiverse idea, that just about every mathematical system is instantiated in some universe or other in order to guarantee that there's a universe for life. So you are inevitably taken into realms of significant speculation, to put it like that. And it doesn't escape the need for God to create the whole caboodle. I mean, God is the cause of the multiverse, even if it gets round, or at least partly gets round the fine tuning, and there are issues.
Is this just for you, Lawrence? Is this just God of the Gaps under a different name?
Yeah, ultimately yes. I mean, I think we agree that science. Well, I'm the first one to point out science has limitations in what it can talk about, and what happens, however, and I think really the point of the book that's causing such angst is that those limitations get pushed. The parts of the universe, the questions we can't ask keep getting changed. And we used to a century ago we might not have asked the question about is morality determined by biology, and that would have been off limits for science. And now with neuroscience, that's being asked. So we're constantly pushing the boundaries, but if you want to put God where we can't find them, which is really what God is. In fact, once again, God created all those wonderful miracles you're talking about only at a time when the earth happened to be where he didn't do it in China where people could read, but in illiterate peasants in the middle of the desert. I mean, it's kind of amusing to me that we find all these wonderful miracles at places where you can't substantiate any of them. Anyway.
Oh, I think the gospel writers were pretty sophisticated. Some of them were more sophisticated than others, certainly. But be that as it may, one of the interesting points or distinctions you make in the book is between the how and the why. I think you sort of elide the two. But when it comes to, fundamentally, the difference between a theological explanation and a scientific one is the scientific one is giving us the how, and the theological one is giving us the why, the meaning, the purpose, and so on of the universe. And I think the same would be true when we come to talk about morality. Why are we in a universe that has concepts of right and wrong? I happen to believe in that there is such a thing as objective morality, which is sort of controversial in some circles, but if it doesn't exist, then I think we're in deep trouble. And so, what is it that makes it wrong for us to torture babies, for example? I think that would be an example. And I don't think there are empirical experiments you can do to test that. This is outside the realms of science.
We circumcise them.
Well, I think you're making yes, I know what your point you're making there, Lawrence. But
sure, but we don't. But yeah, so. We can talk about the how of how, the sort of reasons within evolution that occur for, animals protecting their own kin and that kind of thing. But that is very far removed from the leading of a sacrificial moral life, as is demanded by the gospel of Jesus Christ.
I mean, this moves us into the area, Lawrence, of purpose, and Richard Dawkins has that famous statement, doesn't he? The universe, we observe, has precisely the properties we expect if there is at bottom no, and he gives a list of things: good, bad, purpose, evil, and whatever. Just nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, he finishes it up. Now, do you essentially agree with that assessment of the universe we live in? It is just what it is, and there is no good, no evil, no purpose to it, apart from, I suppose, what we can make for ourselves in our finite time.
There's certainly no evidence of any of that. There's every evidence. In fact, every bit of evidence that we have about nature is that it doesn't. Is that we are irrelevant, and it doesn't. And
it's
and
interesting.
What we think is important is not relevant to the universe.
It's interesting, though, because you seem in the book, I noticed in the chapter where you talk about the fact that there's this interesting aspect that we seem to have we live at this very special moment in the history of the universe where we can unlock the secrets of the past universe, and that won't be the future scientists in other civilizations in trillions of years' time won't be able to do that, because by then the galaxies will be too far apart from us to be able to see them and that sort of thing.
Well, as with many things I wrote, that's to provoke people to think about this, because absolutely it is a remarkable thing that we are at a unique time. But I tried to indicate I was being a little bit facetious because there may be observables that those observers can see that we can't see.
Okay.
So in some sense, everything is a unique time, but we're very fortunate to be able to detect things that they won't be able to see. But the shoe could be on the other foot as well.
I suppose what I was getting to, though, was that you almost long for this to, you see it as a dreadful shame that we will lose, that what our perspective won't be available to those people in the far distant future.
I think
and you almost long for, I don't know, that this knowledge we have, that there is a sense of purpose to what we've done. Because surely it's not just going to evaporate as we evaporate in the universe. I mean, that you appear to long for some kind of purpose, even if you say.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether I long for some kind of purpose. I guess it's that search for understanding, and when you just like when the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, it was a horrible thing, and I guess I view knowledge as a wonderful, probably the most exciting aspect of having a consciousness, and for me, in fact, that's the purpose of with the purpose we make in our lives is to understand the universe and try to make the most of our lives while we're here. And the more understanding we have, the better we can do. So I guess that's why I long for I feel sad when we lose understanding.
Sure, absolutely. I think that's absolutely great. I mean, I must admit, I agree with that. But one of the interesting things is that's raised by this discussion of purpose and meaning and so on is Einstein's question: why is the universe comprehensible? I mean, he said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. It is a truly remarkable fact that we can do science at all, let alone that we're in this particular period when we can do cosmology and unlock the secrets of the universe from the Big Bang to the furthest reaches, so to speak. It's a truly remarkable capacity that we as human beings have, and theologically we would say that that's because we're made in the image of God. Now, I know you'll deride that, but that would be why that was.
I mean, what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I agree with you that it is remarkable that the universe is comprehensible. I don't understand why it is, but I want to enjoy it.
Isn't it crying out for some explanation, though? I mean, the fact is the universe didn't have to have the properties that make it so incredibly unlockable to us. But it does have this incredible symmetry, this beauty. I mean, it is that, you talk yourself, Lawrence, about only being satisfied with equations and theories that have a beauty to them. Why? Surely doesn't that engender the next question? Why is the universe like that?
Well, it's a good question, but I think you made a presumption there. You said it didn't have to be like that. One of the reasons I became a physicist is to try and figure out if it had to be like that. I mean, the thing that Einstein asked, and he asked it another way, which sounds theological, but he didn't mean God. He said, did God have any choice in the creation of the universe? And what he really meant is, could you change things and still have a coherent universe? Or if you change one thing, does the whole universe fall apart? Those are fascinating questions, and they're questions we want to answer, not by assuming the answer and saying, oh, yes, it had to be that way, but by asking questions to see if the other possibilities are there. So I don't presume to answer that question. I'd like to know it by learning about the universe and try and figuring out using mathematics and empirical discovery whether it could have been different, and if so, how.
Well, I would agree with that, but I think even if it couldn't be different, my goodness, it's a truly remarkable fact that a universe whose laws are, in some sense, the only self-consistent set of laws that could pertain, give rise to the fascinating and wonderful cosmos that we actually see, including the existence of great cosmologists.
I mean, from your point of view, Rodney, while this isn't in any sense a proof of God, it's certainly for you consonant with the idea of a God who is in upholding the universe, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, indeed, I mean, the fundamental point about the Christian doctrine of creation isn't really to do with the beginning, but it's to do with God upholding the universe moment by moment. And these sorts of things we've been discussing are consonant. I think they're pointers towards God. I mean, I wouldn't use the term proof. I mean, traditionally in Christian theology, we've talked about classical proofs of God, cosmological proof, design proof, and so on. I think that's the wrong word for the kinds of reasons we've discussed earlier. Anyway, you know, we're never quite at knowledge. We're at belief with degrees of probability and so on.
I mean, before we just close up this section of the programme, the one thing that struck me as I was reading this book is that obviously, Lawrence, you believe that what science tells us now is that eventually the universe will kind of dissipate. There will be what it's sometimes termed a heat death of the universe.
Cold death.
And so it's a kind of a slightly depressing thought that all of this will go at some point. I mean, for you, that is just the way it is, and we've just got to live with it, I guess. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, if it is the way it is, we have to live with it because we have no choice. But I doubt we can change the global properties of the universe. But I think that's the other. But you hit on a really important point that maybe, I don't know if I emphasize enough in the book, but it is this conceit we have as humans, first of all, that we're the pinnacle of evolution, that the Earth was created for us, and at the same time we have this conceit that the universe was created for us, and it's always going to be the way it is. And the point is, it won't. In the far future, the universe will be quite different. And as my friend Christopher Hitchens, who was writing the foreword before he died, said, nothing is heading towards us as fast as it can. So one simple answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is just wait, there won't be for long.
Well, indeed. I mean, the point is, and I'll come to Rodney now, is that now this could be where there is a conflict between science and religion, Rodney, because you don't believe that is the ultimate outcome for humanity, a kind of non-existence in the future. You believe, presumably in accord with the scriptures, that God will do some act of recreation. There will be as it says, a new heavens and a new earth. So science, in that sense, or our scientific predictions, will be subverted by the God who created the scientific laws in the first place.
Yes, I do think that. I mean, of course, these cosmological timescales are in many ways irrelevant anyway. We as human beings would cease to exist long before the cold death of the universe, and we could destroy ourselves. And indeed, Martin Rees gives us a 50% chance of doing that in the next century. So we could do that. But I think what leads me to believe in the recreation, I don't think it's pie in the sky. I think it's based on the faithfulness of God, who is revealed in Scripture, who we know in the life of the Church, and who raised Jesus from the dead, and Jesus was seen alive by many people afterwards. And it's God's. That's the sign of God that will happen to us and to the universe. And it's his faithfulness in that.
I know you're going to want to respond to that, Lawrence, but I'm going to just quickly pause here. We're going to go to another quick break, and we'll come back for just final thoughts from you both and a response from you, Lawrence. You're listening to Unbelievable today as we ask, can we get a universe from nothing? Or at least that was where we started out. We've also been talking about multiverses and the scientific laws of the universe and the intelligibility of the universe and all sorts of other things in a fascinating discussion today with Lawrence Krauss, who is the author of A Universe from Nothing. Rodney Holder's been in conversation with him today from the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion, and we're going to be concluding our conversation in a moment's time. Welcome back to Unbelievable, Saturday afternoon. Going to be concluding our conversation on the birth of the cosmos with Lawrence Krauss and Rodney Holder in just a moment's time. What a fascinating discussion it's been thus far, very lively. But I think we're all enjoying it. Now, just a reminder, and sorry if you're sick of hearing about this already, if you're a regular podcaster or listener, but should just remind you, Unbelievable, the conference 2012. Don't forget, just 4 weeks away now. Top speakers, loads of seminars. It's going to be a great day, and I hope you can join me. Do go to the website and book your place there, premier.org.uk/reasons. Later on in the show, as well as hearing some of your feedback, I'll be giving you an idea of some of the other things that are going to be happening in the week around the conference, because our guests from the US, Ken Samples and Hugh Ross, are going to be joining me for a couple of debates, and you might be able to get along to one or two of them as well. So listen out for that. And Hugh Ross joins me next week. In fact, we're going to be he'll be responding to some of the comments on today's programme. He's going to be in conversation, though, on that occasion with Paul Davies, who is in himself a noted physicist. Indeed, funnily enough, he works right next door to Lawrence Krauss, who we've got on the show today, because he's also at Arizona State University. Takes a somewhat different view of the facts of the matter when it comes to the questions surrounding the birth of the universe and why we're here. So that'll be a fascinating discussion with another top physicist and another great communicator on that front between Hugh Ross and Paul Davies at the same time next week. Next week we'll be asking a similar but related question: why is the universe the way it is? So tune back in for that at the same time next week.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Welcome back, and just concluding that conversation now, Lawrence Krauss has been with us, atheist, physicist from Arizona State University. His book, A Universe from Nothing, has had many plaudits, but also some critics, and we've been talking about that on the programme today. Can you get a universe from nothing, we've been asking. And Rodney Holder has been putting forward a Christian perspective himself, an astrophysicist by background. Gentlemen, as we start to draw things to a close, I mean, Lawrence, I'm sure that what Rodney said in that last section, where he said why he does believe that the universe won't ultimately, that isn't our fate, that there is going to be this recreation that God promises, and he believes he's got good reasons for believing in that. For you, this is all very anti-scientific, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. First, by the way, you called me an atheist, and I don't call myself that.
Apologies.
I call myself an anti-theist.
An anti-theist. You go one step further.
I can't say for certain there's no God, but I can certainly say I wouldn't want to live in a universe with one. Some cosmic Saddam Hussein who set things up. But in any case, but let me respond to Reverend Holder's statement. First of all, I've enjoyed the discussion.
Tremendous.
And I don't want to minimize or demean what you just said, but I'm about to. But because I think you've demonstrated you're a very thoughtful, intelligent, sensible man. But it seems to me the one place where you throw out all of that is where you just said it. Somehow you what you've demonstrated is you feel the need for consolation, and you certainly hope there'll be a better future. And then you say, well, and I believe that because I read a book written several hundred years after the fact that tells me eyewitnesses saw someone being resurrected. And to me that's the kind of evidence that wouldn't hold up in court, and much less in any scientific argument. So I think the point is that what you've demonstrated, which I think is true, is that many religious people basically turn their minds off when they say, this is what I want to be true, and I really hope it is. And I understand that hope, and I understand your desire, but I think that's where you're departing from the sensibility that's characterized the rest of your comments.
Well, thank you very much, Lawrence, because I've really enjoyed the conversation too, and I think we've had a terrific time. Just to get back to you a bit on that point, I think one of the things I found in your book is that the God I believe in isn't quite the God that you portray, and certainly isn't the cosmic Saddam Hussein. And I think I get my picture of what God is like from his revelation in the person of Jesus Christ, who taught us to love our enemies, to do good to those who hurt us, and so on. So he is the ultimate revelation for me. And I don't think I believe for consolation. I think Christian faith, it can be desperately challenging. I mean, it's even starting to be persecuted to some degree in this country, but there are other Christians around the world who are dying for their faith daily, literally, or being imprisoned and tortured for their faith. To be a Christian is a very challenging thing. There is consolation, but that's not the that's not the fundamental thing about it. And indeed, when we face God, we'll have to face Him in judgment for the things we've done and the people we've hurt and so on. So there are some disturbing things about the faith. It's not again like with science. It's the way it is, not the way we might want it to be. So I think there is certain commonality.
When you say we have to face Him in judgment, you talk about this God of love and everything else.
Yeah.
But somehow, if you don't believe in Him, you don't get any of the benefits. So you have to believe, and then if you do something wrong, you're going to be judged for it. So I want to be judged by God. I want to be, that's the bottom line.
Well, the great thing is that Jesus is, as the great theologian Karl Barth put it, the judge judged in our place. So we do have that knowledge that although we might have to face up to what we've done, then we will ultimately be acquitted on the basis of what Christ has done for us.
I mean, we haven't got time, unfortunately, to go into what could be a fascinating now theological discussion.
We really are getting to different territory.
in different territory. But Lawrence, it's been very interesting having you on, and I hope that if you're able to, you go and order Lawrence's book and make up your own mind about what both the the praise and the criticisms that it's come in for. But it's got conversations going, and that's never a bad thing in many ways. So, Lawrence, thank you very much for joining me on the programme today. Great to have you with me.
It's been really enjoyable, unexpectedly so.
Okay, good. I'm pleased. I'm pleased we've given you a pleasant surprise. And Rodney, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to put links to both my guests with the podcast of this programme. Of course, you can find out more about the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion, where they regularly run courses in Cambridge for those who want to look at the interface of faith and science. Lawrence, of course, has a website of his own, and I'll link to that and where you can find out more about the book as well. For the meantime, thank you very much for joining me, and I do hope we'll see you both again at some point, perhaps in the future. And for you listening, if you want to get in touch with me about the programme today, I'm sure many people are already at their keyboards busily typing away their responses from both points of view. Then you can always email unbelievable@premier.org.uk, and I'll give the other ways of getting in touch in just a moment's time as we come to look at some of your feedback to the last few weeks of programming.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Well, I do hope you've enjoyed the show, and I mentioned the email address there. If you want to get in touch, though, on the Facebook or Twitter account, you can do that. You can get online. All these links, by the way, available from the web page, as I mentioned, premier.org.uk/unbelievable. But at UnbelievableJB is the Twitter handle if you want to correspond with me on Twitter. I'm glad to do that. You can also follow on Facebook, and that's facebook.com/unbelievablejb for the Facebook page. Just a few announcements before we get to some of your show responses, which is that as well as having now the Facebook page for Unbelievable, I just started last week a new group because there's been some changes on Facebook, and it's not quite as easy to track conversations between users of the page anymore, and it's a little bit easier in the group format. So we've added that. So if you want to add yourself to the group as well, you can do that. The Unbelievable group, and there's loads of conversations going on there at the moment. In fact, a discussion on last week's show on gay marriage, which we'll come to in a moment, has generated over 500 comments the last time I looked at it. So that's all there as well if you'd like to do that. Also, what you'll find both on the Unbelievable page and indeed on the website, premier.org.uk/unbelievable, is a link, video of a promotional sort of little video for Unbelievable, the Conference 2012. And my thanks to Peter Byram, who produced that for us. And it is a great little video, just gives a good sense of what's coming up in the conference. You might want to pass it on, you might want to post it up on your Facebook page or something. So check that out as well, available on YouTube if you just type in Unbelievable, the Conference. So check that out. And there's been so much going on, added to online things to do with Unbelievable. I haven't even mentioned that since about Easter, you've been able to actually access the William Lane Craig versus Peter Atkins debate that finished off the Reasonable Faith Tour back in October. Well, that was added recently. I haven't even had a chance to mention it on the show, but if you want to watch that, I do recommend you either looking for it on YouTube, search for the Reasonable Faith Tour channel, or you can go to the Premier page where we're hosting all of those videos, and that's premier.org.uk/Craig, and you'll find that's the latest one to have been added there from the Reasonable Faith Tour last year. Lots of people were very interested in seeing that rematch between William Lane Craig, who is of course a well-known Christian philosopher and apologist, and Peter Atkins, a well-known anti-theist. Bears the same sort of title as Lawrence gave himself earlier on in the programme. Of course, Peter Atkins met Callum Miller just last night in Oxford, and you'll be hearing the results of that on a future programme as well. So lots of stuff to listen to, and I hope you enjoy some of that stuff. If you want links to all of these places, the Twitter, the Facebook, the William Lane Craig page, and all sorts of other things. Obviously, the conference, premier.org.uk/unbelievable is a good portal to go to get to any one of them. Now, loads of responses to the gay marriage show last week, which featured gay rights campaigner Peter Tatchell and Peter D. Williams of Catholic Voices, who was obviously arguing against gay marriage. We'll get to that in a moment. I must announce the winners of the competition we ran at Easter to win copies of the Jesus scandals. We had David Instone Brewer and Bob Price on the show then, arguing about the historical Jesus and arguing whether some of the scandals of Easter are good evidence for the historicity of the gospel stories. I asked you to email me what Easter means to you in 20 words or less to win a copy of the book. Here's the people who have done that and will be receiving a copy. Anna says, I'm a believer of Jesus, and Easter to me means righteousness, Easter, spirit, uplifting, religion, revelation, eternal, Christ, Trinity, immortal, omnipresent, necessary. And if you put those all in a line as an acrostic, it would read resurrection. Very good. I like that one, Anna. Here's from Nick what Easter means to me. Easter represents hope and restoration that new life in Christ brings and the promise of life to come. Davy says Easter is a very confusing time. Pagan ceremonies, chocolate, rabbits and Jesus all rolled into one, yet I still have hope. Here's Eric who says, thanks for being a great show host. I really enjoyed the variety of topics on Unbelievable. To me, Resurrection Day means that God exists. Since God exists, we are specially made creations and we have a purpose beyond what we create for ourselves. And you add more to it. But as I said, 20 words or less, I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Eric, that was. Nick says, Israel's story has climaxed. Jesus is the Messiah, the hope of Israel. God's kingdom has begun in Christ. Hope that qualifies. It certainly does, Nick. Copy of the book coming your way. David Alohan, it's about crucifixion and resurrection, restoration, and the link between Christians and Christ Jesus. Thank you, David. Here's Errol, who says, what Easter means to me, Easter symbolises suspension of reason by Christians who supposedly assent to belief that rotting flesh came back to life. Well, even though that's obviously a sceptical view of Easter, you'll be getting a book too, Errol. Caroline, Easter means nothing to me, but Christ's death and resurrection does. Easter is a pagan celebration, and I think it's an insult to attribute it to a holy God. There is a verse that says, ask not of the heathens how they worship their God, that you may worship me. It is an abomination to me. Have you ever heard of pagans taking anything from Christianity? Caroline, even though you disagree with the idea of celebrating Easter at a time when obviously there used to be a pagan festival, I'll still send you a copy of the book because I drew you out. But thank you for those entries. Now, let's play one phone message actually, because I gave a fair bit of feedback to that Easter debate last week on the show. I didn't have time to play this message though. This is from David, who wants to call in on the whole issue of whether Jesus was a historical person. That was a lot of what the conversation was about. Bob Price, very sceptical Bible scholar, claiming that he wasn't even a historical person, he was a myth, against David Instone Brewer, who was coming in on the Christian side. Here's David's view of that discussion.
Hi Justin, this is David Wilkins. The real mistake Bob's making in this discussion with David is not having studied Jewish culture carefully. He's making the assumption that Jewish people behave like Western people, where the greater the triumph, the more amazing the person, therefore Jesus must be God. So in the West, an amazing escape of any type of death would be fine. For a Jewish person, it's very, very different. There are certain things they just would not accept. You try bringing up the crucifixion with a Jew, and they'd say, I don't want to hear about the resurrection. The fact that he was crucified at all means you're talking absolute rubbish, and I'm not willing to hear any more of this. So I actually think that Bob isn't really taking into account how Jewish culture works. He's paying far too much attention to the Greek culture that lived at that time.
Thank you, David. And let's go to some other points of view now on last week's show, and what a lot of response we've had on that. A lot of phone responses as well, so we'll play those out in a moment's time. But we had on the show last week Peter Tatchell, a well-known voice in the gay rights campaign here in the UK, and he was in debate with Peter D. Williams of Catholic Voices. The question was, should gay marriage be legalised? And of course, two very different points of view on in the studio last week on that subject. So thank you for the vast amount of feedback we've had in relation to that. I expected no less. And as I mentioned earlier, there has been a long-running debate going on the new Unbelievable Facebook group, if you want to check that out. David Robertson, who I should remind you is going to be taking part in a gay marriage debate this coming Monday. Not too late, if you're listening in time, to get along to that. It's at Gunnersbury Baptist Church, Monday evening, the 30th of April. He'll be debating someone from the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community. Well, David Robertson wrote in after listening to last week's show and said, Justin, it's rarely that I've listened with such pleasure to a debate. Peter D. Williams wiped the floor with one of the most experienced and difficult debaters in the UK today. Indeed, the secularist of the year, Peter Tatchell. It was a model of how things should be done. Passion combined with knowledge, background research and intelligent articulation of the main issues. I'm not sure Tatchell knew what had hit him. My only quibble is what was just a great programme was that Tatchell got away with saying that polyamory just wouldn't happen because no one was asking for it. Well, yes, some people are asking for it, actually. The logic of his position, as Williams showed, was that given the premises on which Tatchell was arguing, there's no reason that those who wish to marry more than one partner, or indeed their brother, shouldn't do so. Well done, Peter D. Williams. Gave me a lot of encouragement for the coming debate at Gunnersbury on Monday. Thank you very much, David, for getting in touch. David will be on the show in the not-too-distant future, not on the gay marriage issue, but in a different type of conversation. So those who I know enjoy his contributions on the show can look forward to that in the not-too-distant future. Here's Kevin in Oregon, says, good show on homosexuality. Although both speakers made good points, on a show dedicated to apologetics, I thought it was interesting that one of the opening lines by Williams was never discussed. Williams said he returned to Christianity once he realised there was objective moral truth. As Christians, we believe in objective moral truth. And isn't that the real reason why we oppose gay marriage? I don't oppose gay marriage because it's bad for the social fabric and for families. Those reasons are mere symptoms of why it's wrong. The reason I think it's wrong is that I think it's objectively wrong since it goes against divine nature. Can't read out all your email, Kevin, but thank you very much for that interesting analysis of the discussion. Stephen Jackson says, Peter Tatchell is mistaken, I believe, in thinking that if gay couples are to obtain marital status, there will be no legal requirement for churches to provide marriage ceremonies. A recent statement by the European Court of Human Rights declared that on grounds of equality, churches will be required to do so. Here's Judith, who says, my view in a couple of stages, marriage is not only about love or even rights. I won't describe it as an institution, but a union instituted by God, a covenant relationship between one man and one woman. Homosexuals want to redefine it to legitimise what God has deemed unnatural in their sexual relations with one another. You cannot have it both ways. God created men and women's bodies to have a different function, yet to fit together perfectly. Why? It's morally wrong to use the status of marriage just for economic gain, which is what this argument is about. Secondly, I wonder that if the church has dealt with the issue of homosexuality in the past with genuine Christian love for the individuals, then maybe they might not be challenging the institution as forcibly as they have been. Hatred and prejudice only creates more rebellion and opposition, whereas love covers a multitude of sins. I believe if Christians demonstrate genuine love, it will promote transformation in the heart despite the struggles people face, says Judith. This is Sue, who says, very interesting topic. I was astonished when your guest Peter Tatchell said that most lesbian couples will have a male biological parent to the child live in with them. For me, that raised more questions than answers. I'm not sure he said most. I think he said some, but perhaps I misheard that. Why would this be necessary, says Sue? If the gay couples claim they're able to provide everything a child needs, it's simply proof that they do need a male and a female. Secondly, wouldn't this family arrangement of 3 partners lead to other polygamous relationships developing? How would the law challenge them? Thank you very much. And here's Wallace, who says, it's been a long time since we communicated with each other. Keep up the good work. As a forensic psychiatrist specialist, a biological parent, a foster parent and an adoptive parent, I am totally opposed to same-sex marriage, or even the thought of it. I hear a number of arguments being put forward. They all span the continuum from ridiculous to sublime, from the honest to the dishonest. There are 2 basic principles we need to acknowledge. While God hates all sins, he loves all sinners. And secondly, homosexuality is unnatural and wrong. Homosexuality is a lifestyle choice. It's not the same as being black, male or female. Says Cyrus. Well, let's have some in favour of gay marriage now. People who were emailing in on that view. Margot says, great show once again. I was very frustrated with the person against gay marriage. His reasoning that it was a societal norm is simply not valid, or it may have been had he said it was for the good of society. In any case, over the years, we have changed what is good for society. If marriage hadn't changed and evolved over the years, then it would still be the male-dominated institution it was in the past, where women had no value. We evolve in all areas as we learn more, and marriage is no exception. Allowing marriage between two people of the same sex does not mean everything else will be allowed. Every other union will be judged on its own merit when that time ever comes. In my opinion, Peter D. Williams was purposefully ignorant and tried to mislead your audience. The fact is, the majority of people want to allow gays to get married because it doesn't change who they are. Two people who love each other and want to commit to each other in a formalised marriage union should be allowed to do so. It doesn't threaten anyone else's lifestyle. Here's Sebastian, who says Peter D. Williams didn't make much sense rabbiting on about the natural definition of marriage. Who defined it? Humans. And humans can redefine it. I don't understand why Christians become so exercised by the notion. How will gay marriage harm the institution of heterosexual hominid marriage? Anyway, there's no reason why gays getting married should affect or harm heterosexual marriage. And his objections might have more strength if marriage wasn't already a failing state of affairs. I believe the divorce and separation rate for adults getting married is shockingly high. More than 50%. Maybe gays can breathe some new credence into permanent pair bonding. Maybe time for one more before we go to some of the phone calls on this. Charlie, a skeptic from Maine, says, I salute you once again for having more courage than most Christian broadcasters. I can't think of any other religious broadcast which would permit its Christian listeners to hear arguments in favour of gay marriage. And I think you're out in the States, aren't you, Charlie? And you say, this November my state will vote on the issue of gay marriage for the second time. It was interesting to hear British perspectives for and against the issues. The arguments of Peter D. Williams closely tracked the anti-gay advertisements funded by the wealthy, taxpayer-subsidised American churches over here. He attempted to stir up irrational fear of gay parenthood as a means of inflaming the debate, attempting to deceive your listeners about studies on the subject. Peter Tatchell was correct in pointing out the deception. When challenged, Peter Williams claimed gay marriage would be an attack on the religious rights of churches, even though the debate is over the legal protections afforded to couples under the civil contract of marriage. Thank you, Charlie. And again, sorry I can't read out all the email. Time is against us, I'm afraid. Let's hear, though, just a few contributions that have come in by phone from those who were listening to the debate as it went out last Saturday and would like to make their views known on the issue of the legalisation of gay marriage.
It's Joy here. The comment I want to make, I thought Peter Williams was absolutely brilliant. That he had full knowledge and history. He was able to debate every argument that Peter Tatchell put out. Peter, unfortunately, was floundering for reasons. I don't see that, yes, it's okay for now if they get permission to marry in registry offices. But it's not just now, it's for later on. It's a door that once we open it, we will not be able to shut it. So I do think that we still need to continue to pressure that marriage is a partnership between man and a woman.
I've just heard Peter Tatchell saying on your programme that discrimination is not a Christian value. Discrimination is at the heart of Christianity because we are enjoined to discriminate between good and evil. And in this case, between heterosexuality, which is ordained by God, and homosexuality, which seems in this instance to be ordained by Peter Tatchell. God clearly loves all people whom he has created, but if he had meant men to marry men and women to marry women, he wouldn't have created men and women, because it's only men and women who can have children.
I believe that God gave marriage as a gift, and I believe that the gays and these people that are wanting to marry same-sex, I just think they're making a laughing stock of what God's given us as a gift, and I just think it's a disgrace.
Well, there you go. As you can see from the emails and the phone calls, and a variety of opinions came through, but obviously the majority of them against gay marriage in this instance. Again, if you want to get your voice heard, you can always have your right of reply by emailing unbelievable@premier.org.uk. Just a chance to mention again that before the end of today's show that you can get in touch also on Facebook and Twitter, Search for Unbelievable JB on those forums. And I alluded to the fact that there are some other events going on in relation to the visit of Hugh and Ken from the States, and I'll fill you in on those next week, because we've got what looks like an old Earth, young Earth creationist debate in the offing at Gunnersbury Baptist Church, and we'll be able to give you more details of that next week. And we'll also, there'll be Imperial College are looking to set up a debate with an atheist scientist as well. So a couple of events you may be interested in hearing about, plus a church leaders brunch. Get in touch with me if you're a church leader and you would like to be at the brunch we're organising in London in the week of Hugh and Ken's visit to introduce their ministry to church leaders. Unbelievable at premier.org.uk. I'll fill you in on more details next week, of course. And I look forward to greeting you, meeting you, saying hi at Unbelievable the Conference 2012 in 4 weeks' time. Saturday the 26th of May. I hope you can join me for that. It's going to be a great day when we hear from a range of top speakers, and book yourself in for what promises to be the Apologetics Conference of the Year here in the UK in London. premier.org.uk/reasons. In the meantime, I'll say goodbye until next week's show. Here's what's coming up then.
You're unbelievable.
Hugh Ross is one of our keynote speakers at Unbelievable the Conference, and he'll be joining me along with Paul Davis, who is a well-known cosmologist, a popular author on the subject. They're going to be answering the question, why is the universe the way it is? They'll be responding to some of the issues that came up in today's programme with Lawrence Krauss and Rodney Holder. And they'll be looking at some of the results from a survey that we conducted recently on what the British public believe about the origins of the universe, whether God created it or not. So I hope you can join me for that at the same time next week here on the show that aims to get you thinking unbelievable.